This is a Viva PR podcast.
My little girl, it was her first day at school, and I had Simon Isbell from Channel 4 on one phone and Mark on the other. He's like, I'm going live in 2 minutes. I've got to speak to him, dear. I've got to speak to him. A police officer was shot through the hand in my first week. When proceedings are active, something like that's happened, you have to be really careful about what you can and can't print. I've got two little girls, Tilly, who's 8. When she was 18 months old, she was diagnosed with a really rare life-limiting condition. It's okay to not accept something absolutely awful, but you can live alongside it.
Hello and welcome to PR in the Real World. This podcast often shines a light on the unheralded professionals who keep the comms world ticking, the people doing the real work in real life under real pressure. And today's episode, it's a little different and honestly, a little special. My guest is Dee Cowburn, a crisis comms expert, former journalist and all-round powerhouse who's worked on some of the toughest stories and most demanding comms roles you can imagine. But this conversation goes beyond job titles and campaign battle scars because Dee's circumstances are unique. She's not just a respected professional, she's also a carer to her daughter Tilly, who lives with a rare life-limiting condition. And what Dee shares with us is deeply human, incredibly honest, and I think truly inspiring. It's exactly what PR in the real world was set up to do, to tell the stories that really get told, stories of strength, struggle, and the often messy, remarkable balance between professional ambition and careers and personal reality. So settle in. This is PR in the real world in the fullest sense. Dee, welcome to PR in the real world. Before we get into the real meat of the conversation, let's start at the beginning. Can you give listeners a quick overview of your journey into journalism and eventually what led you into comms?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in news. I've always been interested in current affairs from really young. I did lots of different jobs to my mum's frustration. And then I did a night course actually at Coventry University just around writing. And one of the sub-editor from the Coventry Evening Telegraph was running it and said, you know, have you ever thought of a career in journalism? And I thought, well, actually, no, but why not? Give it a go.
You were quite a late entry into the...
Yeah, 28 when I trained to be a journalist, which is pretty late. I went originally for a sports editor's job. So I did, I don't even know if this is a thing anymore. I did distance learning with the NCTJ and I self-taught and got myself up to like 60 words per minute shorthand. And then there was a job for a sports journalist in Leamington. So I went for it and got an interview. And the editor said, why on earth are you here? You don't know anything about sport. What are you even doing in front of me? And I said, well, you're interviewing me. So hopefully if something comes up from a news point of view, you'll look at interviewing me again. Because he said, you know, you can write, but why have you come for this job? And that's what happened. So when the next job came up in Coventry, the editor rang me up, I had an interview and got the job. So that's how I got into journalism.
What kind of jobs were you doing before then?
Had lots of different jobs. I worked in the civil service, like the land registry, you know, like when you buy your house and like all the dusty old, it used to be like all the dusty old documents, you used to have to try and convert them to get them online so that when you were searching for your certificates around property ownership, they were never digital before. So I was part of a team responsible for that. And it wasn't the job for me, really. I'm not really into registering properties. I'm sure it is a crucial job, but it just didn't suit my personality at all. I was also an air hostess for a bit, which I always use as an icebreaker when people say, guess which one of these 3 jobs you did. So I've used that before and people are like, no way, you weren't an air hostess. But I did that for 6 months as well. I got hauled in because I was off too much on a Saturday night and they were like, why, for a 24-year-old, you're off quite a lot on a Saturday, which I was. It's hard work. I've got ultimate respect for cabin crew because it is a very difficult, very demanding, physically demanding job. So yeah, I did that. So I did a bit of lots of different things. I worked in Marks and Spencer's. That was my first job. I loved it. I loved Marks and Spencer's. I love people. I love any job that brings me into contact with people.
Well, journalism suddenly found you by the sounds of it. And what did you find when you got into the newsroom then? What was your early impressions like?
It wasn't what I expected really, because as you know, I'm sure you're a former journalist as well. It's I found it quite a quiet atmosphere, you know, everyone heads down. You know, I came in at a time where local journalists, print journalists were finding the pressure from things going online and the business model wasn't working anymore. So you were stretched, didn't have enough staff. So I found it quite a tricky concept to get myself stuck in and be quiet, be quiet for quite a long period of time to try and find a story. But I absolutely loved it. Once I sort of found my feet, I loved it because, you know, you'd be sent to court one day to cover a court story, you'd be sent to cover inquests, you'd be sent to cover quirky. You know, I covered a story about Elvis, a guy who was an Elvis impersonator who built a flight simulator in his bedroom. So that was quite an interesting one. And also, I don't know if you remember Pablo Mason, he was like an airline pilot. I think he got into trouble for letting a football player into the cockpit, but that was before this happened. He launched a flying school in Coventry. So I covered that, and I covered loads of, you know, random celebrities that would come to Coventry or stuff going on at the theatre. Just, and you know, you've invited in to and I certainly found this in Bradford as a journalist as well. You're invited in to people's lives. They experience a once in a lifetime thing and they'll talk to the media about it for whatever reason. And I sort of felt quite privileged to be part of that.
Yeah.
And as my confidence grew and as, you know, I sort of grew into it, yeah, I absolutely loved it. The one story though, and this always stays with me, and I always use this actually in training as well, if I did any media training, was the taxi licensing one. Around, I wrote a story about taxi drivers going on strike, and my editor, this was back in the day, I don't know if this still happens, put red pen through it and said, don't come back to me until you've understood the story because you haven't written it in a way that you understand it. This was quite early on, so I rang the head of taxi licensing at Coventry City Council and he explained it all to me. So then that was a very important lesson for me actually, around you've got to understand the nuts and bolts regardless of what it is, because if you can't explain it in really simple terms and you don't understand it, you can't hold people to account and you can't give an informative, comprehensive account of it. So I learned that through the taxi licensing story.
Interesting. So you ended up getting it right then.
I got it right then. Yeah, he was quite I look back and I'm glad I had that grounding. I think and that's why I think grassroots journalism is so important. Local journalism is so important because it's where a lot of the national stuff falls out of, isn't it? It's from local journalism.
Yeah, definitely. So you moved from Coventry. Did you go direct to Bradford then, or?
Yeah, no, sorry. So I moved from so I was in Coventry. I was on the Coventry Observer, and then I got a job in Jersey because I did my time there and it was a weekly, and I wanted to get on. It was always, you know, get onto a daily, certainly if you're a print journalist. And a job came up in Jersey on Hold the Front Page, and I thought, you know what? I've never been to Jersey, I'll give that a go. And my mum, yeah, I thought, well, why not? You know, and my mum had passed away the December before, so I applied in probably the June time. I thought I need to get away. I need something different. And my sister said, Jersey looks really nice, you know. Why don't you give that a go?
Yeah.
And Coventry Airport just opened up a new route to Jersey as well, which seemed quite handy. So anyway, I got a job in Jersey. So I packed up my car. I had £600 in the bank that my sister let me borrow off her and drove to Jersey. Didn't know anyone. Went for the interview, got the job, and then yeah, went over on the ferry with all my belongings in the back of my car. So I was a journalist in Jersey for 4 years, and that's where I met my partner Rob. And yeah, I was an investigative journalist there, but that has a lifespan because Jersey is 9 miles by 5. So there's only so many people you can upset or challenge.
If you look at Bergerac, there's something going on every week, isn't there? So
Wow, I interviewed John Nettles. They say don't meet your heroes. I mean, he's lovely. I interviewed him a couple of times. I'm a big Midsummer Murders fan. I got a Bergerac box set when I left my first journalism job. So yeah, no, I loved it. And Jersey is a very, again, really interesting place. And the former editor of the Jersey Evening Post is a great mentor and friend of mine, Chris Bright. He's amazing. So Jersey's like any other close-knit community. It's rich in news stories and their political system's really interesting. So yeah, I learned a lot there, and I love my time in Jersey.
excellent. So you were there for 4 years, and so is that when you moved on to Bradford, and what was the role there that you got?
Yeah, so I moved from so I was in Jersey, and then I left Jersey and moved to Bradford to the Telegraph and Argus. So I was there for more than a couple of years. So yeah, I was the assistant news editor by the time I left Bradford. And journalism's a great job, but print journalism's really going, it makes me really saddened when I see it now, but it was really going through it then. You know, you had to try and source like 4 news stories a day and loads of news in brief, which sounds fine, but it's quite difficult to try and, you know, get all those stories, really compelling news stories, and turn them around.
It's a treadmill, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what it became for me. It was a treadmill. And I just thought, you know, and there's quite a lot of national stories do come from, you know, a lot of court reporting in Bradford does end up in national. And, you know, you're covering, you know, we saved the Media Museum. That was during my time there. And, you know, but you're also covering really tragic stories like the baby that was found in the cot. He'd been in his cot for about 18 months. That was one of the first stories that I covered in Bradford. So you're dealing with, you know, difficult stuff, but it's also a really pressured environment. So I sort of, again, love my time there, but it felt like it came to a natural end in Bradford, which is when I left journalism and went into communications.
And what did you know about the communications world at that point, and what was the attraction?
Well, there was always a case of, a lot of journalists will say, when they, oh, you're going over to the dark side, sort of, you know, it's PR. For me, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with PR, by the way, it's really important, and that's obviously what I'm doing now. But at the time, police and crime commissioners had just been brought in, and Sir Mark Burns-Williamson was the first police and crime commissioner for West Yorkshire. And we used to get stuff from his office when I was a journalist at the TNA, and I thought, why aren't they doing more on this? And why aren't they doing more on that? So then when I saw the head of comms role come up, I thought, you know, I'm going to go for that. So I set up his press office function and his communications function at the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Up to that point, I thought that communications, the only really bit I'd had an involvement with it was press releases in, promoting products and promoting services. I hadn't really thought about it any wider than that. But when I saw this role come up, it felt like, do you know what? It's policing and crime. It's similar to what I'm doing, but just on the other side in terms of still performing a public service, informing the public and community reassurance and things. So I just thought, yeah, why not give it a go? You know, see if I can make a difference.
Interesting. So, what was that like when you landed there? How different was it, and how challenging was it, or did you immediately feel like you've landed in the right place?
No, not at all. It was significantly different because as a journalist, so I always felt I was the only journalist in a newsroom without a degree. So everyone had a degree, most people, you know, and a lot of journalists I found, now this is sweeping generalization, not all journalists like this, and I'm certainly not, but quite quiet and self-contained. I didn't always feel like I fit, and I always felt like I was trying to prove something because I didn't have a degree. That's just my own personal thing. So moving over, again, you're out of your comfort zone. I'd got to a point where I'd be, you know, supporting to run a newsroom and getting a paper out, you know, and getting a front page. And then you're on the other side, you're working for one person, but he's at that point was the most highest profile politician in West Yorkshire. This before we had mayors.
Yeah.
And if anything happened from a police and crime point of view, we would get the challenging press queries in. So when I first landed, journalists were just ringing up about all sorts, and there wasn't any process in place for really managing that. So I felt like I brought my journalist head in to try and manage it in a sort of sustainable way, you know, fielding press queries, managing them. And also, though, you haven't got the support of a newspaper and an editor. You're sort of accountable, really.
Yeah.
I found that quite terrifying at first, if I'm honest, because in my first week, I think I'd said like a police officer was shot through the hand in my first week. So they wanted him live on local news to talk about that and to talk about arming police officers. So he's obviously looking to me for a press briefing and, you know, guidance as to what they want, what he can say, what he can't say, because when proceedings are active, you know, when something like that's happened, you have to be really careful about what you can and can't print. So really, you haven't got that support network of an editor and a news editor sat behind you and loads of journalists. You're it. So I found that quite terrifying, if I'm honest, at the very start. Obviously, didn't tell Mark that. I'm thinking, oh my God.
So you had this serene expression on.
Oh yeah.
I've got this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, you've the thing is, you have to, even if I don't necessarily feel it, I think I can come across quite calm, my personality probably masks my nervousness. I talk more.
Yeah.
Probably doing a really good job of that right now. But you also I thrive in those sort of environments. It's like my natural habitat, I suppose. So even though I felt terrified, I felt comfortable enough to know, do you know what, I'll be all right because I've got the years and judgment and experience behind me, so it'll be fine. And it was fine. And I sort of grew in confidence as the job went on.
So what approach did you take when you were having to handle those tricky stories? Was there a strategy that you had in your head that this is how we're going to handle these things, Mark?
Yeah, I sort of said to him early on, and I was very lucky actually that Mark was a great person to work for because he'd listen, he respected the fact that he had people around him to advise him on specific things. And I'd say to him, you know, I said this to him early on, it's really important as a journalist, I've got my integrity, and that's exactly the same as, you know, you have to be transparent with integrity and face the challenging stuff head on because you're accountable, because you're elected and you're accountable to the community of West Yorkshire. And I just felt that as long as, you know, could work with that, then I could do my job. So in my head, I've always approached it like a journalist. You don't lose that sense of being a journalist. I mean, even now I'm like that. So I would think if something happened, I'd immediately think, okay, what do the public need to know? What do the public need to know? What, always considering people at the heart of it, you know, a person who's been injured or a community that's been devastated, but at this also what's in the public interest and what can we release? And what would I want to know as a journalist? And I would always work backwards from my end point. If I was a journalist, what would I want to know? What can we release?
Yeah.
And work backwards from that. That's how I've always approached it. That's how I always approached it with Mark, and that's how I always approached it with the media as well. No matter how challenging the story.
Interesting. I mean, and you had to deal in a very short space of time with some incredibly challenging stories, didn't you?
Yeah, because West Yorkshire is very diverse, made of 5 very diverse areas. And in the time I was there was 2013 to 2024. So we had the shooting of a police officer. We also had the tragic death of Anne Maguire, the teacher that was killed in a classroom. You had the murder of Jo Cox, the MP in Batley, a teenager killed outside his school, a school, as a result of knife crime. You had Mark was the national spokesperson for human trafficking and modern slavery. So the 39 victims that were found in the back of a lorry in Kent, that obviously came into his remit in terms of speaking about that on a political level, because again, that was an active investigation. Child sexual exploitation in South Yorkshire, obviously that happened in South Yorkshire, but then the spotlight came onto West Yorkshire. Could that happen here? What work's being done? It's quite a challenging area of.
Your phone must have been red hot then, morning, noon, and night.
Yeah, it was. And I remember when Boris Johnson came up for the police recruitment uplifting, he came to Police HQ for that, and there was some criticism in the media about him being pictured with lots of police officers behind him. And it was the first day of my little girl, it was the first day at school, and I had sort of Simon Israel from Channel 4 on one phone and Mark on the other. And he's like, I'm going live in 2 minutes. I've got to speak to him, dear. I've got to speak to him. And it's like, I'd accommodate as much as I possibly could. And he did, you know, he spoke to him and things like that. But your phone doesn't stop. And most of the queries are quite challenging ones. You know, it wasn't an easy, it's not an easy job. It's not an easy job, policing and crime. And obviously, it's in the public interest, and journalists have got a right to know things that serve the public interest. It's a vocation more than a job. I think you can't look at it, you know, you don't, you don't switch off from it. You can't, because there's so much that goes on, and you need to be able to brief. You need to be able to be in a position to give a really comprehensive briefing. If they've got to face the media, they'll have a grip of it all, but you need to be able to frame that in a way that they're getting the important messages around reassurance, etc. across.
It sounds daunting just listening to you, having to deal with that kind of stuff. And before we hit the recording button, you talked to me about imposter syndrome, and we all struggle with that sometimes. How did you keep that at bay and in those times, or did you suffer from it at all?
Well, I think, like, I really looked up to my editor in Jersey, incredible man, hugely intelligent, really, really humble and really unassuming. And he had no ego at all. And I'd be like, I always sort of call him for advice and things. And I think it's like, I think what it felt for me was everyone feels like that, or everyone's got a degree of insecurity. It's just about how you manage it. And for me, it was having good people around me, because if I was feeling insecure because I was massively out of my comfort zone, it was recognizing I'm out of my comfort zone. But what brought me here? I've got all these years of experience as a journalist. I'm trained in how to ask questions, develop briefings. I understand what's in the public interest, and I understand what journalists need. It's quite a specific skill set, I think. And I used to, if I had a wobble, I would always sort of just think, I've got the experience and I've got the judgment and I've got people around me I can call on, and something would happen and would be able to sort of deal with it. And that built my confidence up every time that something happened. It's like, do you know what? I know I can deal with this. And it's like muscle memory, I suppose. I still get imposter syndrome even now. It's important to always, I'm not saying it's important to have imposter syndrome, but I think everyone gets it to some degree. The way of managing it for me is having a good network of people around me that I can sense check, who I respect, and recognizing, even sometimes doing myself a list, what have I covered? Remembering that, because your mind can play tricks on you. So you've got to literally like write it down, remember what you've achieved.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is really important for me.
Interesting. And I mean, it sounds like a job that you absolutely loved and you were born for in a way, the way you landed. But 12 months ago, you decided to step away and set up your own consultancy. Can you tell our listeners what led to that decision and why you've done it?
Yeah, so I think my personality is very suited to, I like sort of, that sounds wrong, I'll dial that back. I don't like crisis situations, but I think that I can handle crisis situations. My personality and skill set suited to it. And I love it. And I've always enjoyed it. And I've always enjoyed sort of making a difference. But gosh, now I've got two little girls, Thea, who's 9, and Tilly, who's 8. She'll be 9 in September. Thea's 10, sorry, she's not 9 anymore. She was 10 last week. Tilly, when she was 18 months old, she was diagnosed with a really rare life-limiting condition called Rett syndrome. It mainly affects little girls. It can affect boys, predominantly girls. And what that means in really simple terms is, I say Tilly's like a cute blonde Stephen Hawking. So she's intellectually like any other child her age, but her body doesn't work in the way that it should. And the pediatrician, when she was diagnosed, said, this was when I was still working for Mark, said, keep everything completely the same. And I sort of held on to that as the mantra, keep everything completely the same. And it worked until it didn't work anymore. And then it became a bit of a suffocating thing for me, really. So getting back to why, and this was a driver for me, launch my own consultancy, because she was diagnosed in 2018, and in the last 7 years it's been a really sort of tricky road in lots of different ways. So Tilly, at first when she was diagnosed, was fine, there weren't any symptoms. Well, she'd stopped moving and she'd stopped using her hands, but to say that she was still eating solid food and she was still able to go to nursery with support, that was all fine, and I carried on working. But then in the last 5-6 years, she's had She's got really weak bones, so she's fractured her left femur twice. We had to move home to get the house renovated so it's wheelchair accessible. Tilly's in a wheelchair. I had to resuscitate her at home because she was unconscious, and she had to have an emergency feeding tube, and then she had a feeding tube in her tummy, so she sort of fed blended food. When she was resuscitated, I remember thinking, oh, that's why they're overreacting. She's fine. She's fine, because you sort of go into some sort of I think you must just go somewhere else in your brain, you know, when you're doing that. And maybe because of my job, I intellectualized a lot of this. By the way, I didn't really deal with it at the time. So and Tilly's got a scoliosis, so she's got a 70-degree curve in her spine, so she'll need spinal fusion surgery when she's about 10. So she's very, very significantly disabled. But what we did was dealt with every single thing that came along. But then she kept getting repeated pneumonia, so she ended up in high dependency because of her pneumonia, and she's been really poorly. So at the end of 2023, they said she's going to need a fundoplication, which is basically they don't do that unless they really have to. But her esophagus was damaged from her aspirating so much from the acid. So they tie the top of the tummy and it makes your tummy smaller. But no one told us that she would need to be on an overnight feeding pump. So they said, you know, you're going to have to get her through Christmas. We're not going to be able to do it before then. And we were like, we don't know how we're going to do it, but we will. But then they rang up and said, you know what, can you get her in next Tuesday for this operation? And we're thinking, brilliant, you know, just before Christmas. So they got her in and did this operation, but then they said that, which was a success and hopefully stops the aspirating and the pneumonia, but she has to be on an overnight pump. So she's on an overnight pump from 8 o'clock at night, drip feeding her food till 6 in the morning, because her tummy can't cope with lots of food in the day. So you have to spread it out over 24 hours. Yeah. And I think that what that did was pushed us into a new level of severity of Rett syndrome.
Yeah.
So it became very apparent very quickly that me holding on to keeping everything the same became like a millstone around my neck. It wasn't a freeing thing to do. And I had to sit and face up to the fact that, do you know what, I can do my job, but I can't do it in the way that I had been doing it, which was we'd gone from working in the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, we'd gone over to having a mayor and a deputy mayor for policing and crime in 2021. So it was more like a breaking news room in that way. And you were constantly on call, which was fine when she was relatively stable. But I think once we moved into a new level of severity with Tilly and having that operation, I had to sit down and think, I still want to work. I love what I do, but I've got to do it in a different way. And that's when I decided to go freelance. Yeah, go freelance, start my own consultancy.
Thank you for sharing. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your kind of daily routine with Tilly and how you manage to juggle the job and her needs?
Yeah, so I thought this earlier on before. I was thinking I'm going to sound like The Rock. I'm certainly not like The Rock, like Dwayne Johnson, because one of the guys I used to work with, we used to say we're going to get the Rock clock, because apparently he's got an alarm clock that goes off at 5 in the morning, like a massive motivational thing. So I don't use that, but I get up at 5 because this pump that Tilly's got, I don't know who set it up or designed it, but what happens is, I'm sure it is a safety thing, but once the pump runs out, it sounds an alarm, and that alarm doesn't go until you switch it off. So in my desperate attempt to control the time that I do have, I get up at 5 and I do yoga and meditation and stuff. And then at 6 o'clock, the pump goes off. So Tilly needs venting. So you've got to pull air out of her tummy because she gets a really swollen tummy. And then you've got to give her she has medication, and then she has something every 2 hours, so some sort of medication or food, and then we get her ready for school. So Tilly gets picked up by school transport. She goes to a mainstream school, but it has it's wheelchair accessible, and it has other little kids with eye gaze devices. So on the day she goes to school, she'll go to school and she's got a timetable. So every hour they have to move her, because Tilly can't transition herself. She can't sit up unaided. She can't walk unaided. She's got 24-hour care needs. So she needs someone to help her with sitting up, or moving her from sitting to lying, or from lying to going into a standing frame. And then she needs feeding, and you can't lie her down for half an hour after she's been fed because she'll aspirate. And feeding Tilly is you blend the food that we have, make it really thin, and you've got to feed her really slowly with a syringe, like 2 syringes every 4 hours. So it's quite an intense regime. So she has this timetable at school, Tilly's timetable, and they've got kids that they allocate to go in the sensory room with her and things. And she does maths and English, and she's above average for maths and English and her reading, because she does emergent reading on the eye gaze, which is she reads a book and the pictures talk back to her. Then she comes home and her dad does more physio with her at home, because it's really important to keep her moving, because children with Rett syndrome can get locked in really easily if you're not moving and engaging her quite a lot. Fortunate I'm a mum and I don't stop talking, which means there's no danger of Tilly not being stimulated in that way. So that happens she has about an hour or half an hour physio when she comes home, and then she gets bathed and goes to bed. So that starts, so she needs to be in bed for 8 to go on the pump. And that's every single day.
Right.
Yeah.
That's, sat here, it's humbling listening to, I just can't imagine then holding down a job at the same time. You mentioned how you felt Tilly had made you a better person when we chatted before.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I took myself too seriously. I know I did, in terms of, and I don't know about other people who might be listening, but for me, it was a really demanding as a journalist. And before I had kids, I love my job. And when my mum died, so my mum died when I was 30, which is why I went to Jersey. I threw myself into my job. I loved it, and that was really, really important to me. But then when Tilly was diagnosed, I couldn't do that as much, because you can't hide behind, I was hiding behind work, and you can't do that so much. So I think I would be dealing with really high risk crisis situations quite a lot of the time. And I took myself and all of it. It was serious. The things I was dealing with are very serious, but I took myself, I sort of carried the responsibility of things heavily on myself. So I took myself too seriously in that way, if that makes sense. I felt like I was carrying it all, when in reality I wasn't, but that's how I felt. So when Tilly was diagnosed, I had to completely, it dismantles. You don't necessarily always see it at the start. When she was diagnosed, I didn't see it, but it sort of dismantles the very foundation that your world's built on. Because if you've got kids, if you've got children, you can't fix it. It's a very debilitating, frightening place to be. And we didn't know what her prognosis would be then. All I heard was Rett syndrome and 24-hour care. And I can still remember it now. And when they sort of called us in and told us, and I just think that it's quite, she's a gift, really. I've had to dismantle my whole life. Me and my partner, we've had to dismantle our whole lives as to what they were, to create a life of balance, and to create a life that serves us all as a family, as well as obviously supporting the family. I think that what she's taught me is to be grateful for the small things, and to live in the present, and to do things that are purposeful, and to sort of have a life of meaning. And what I mean by that is, I'll stop and I'll look at her, and I'll look at her little angelic face, and she's really cheeky. She's currently in a mood with me because she went to respite for a couple of days, and she won't look at her mummy, and she smiles, and I'm like, Tilly, you're in a mood with me, and she's just like that. She won't look at me. But I just look at her face and I just think she's so amazing and sassy and incredible, and she gets all of her needs met, and she's so powerful at communicating, even though she's non-verbal, that she's humbled me, I suppose. That I just think, what was I racing for? When were things ever going to be enough? When people wait for things to be perfect, or they have a to-do list, and I'm as guilty of that as the next person. But Tilly's taught me to be grateful that she's alive, grateful that she's well, grateful there's interventions that can keep her with us. And that is really, no matter, I still worry about the washing up and like the house isn't clean enough, but that's what stops me in my tracks, is to have her here, and her sister, and know that we're blessed to have them, and we've got a life. I've got a life of meaning, and I wouldn't be without her or a sister. So that's how it's changed me. It's made me less serious and more grateful, I suppose, for what I've got right now, which materially probably isn't as much as I could have had if I was still,
Yeah, it's a fascinating answer, a lot to reflect on. Can we just switch focus a little bit onto your kind of new life as a consultant then?
Yeah.
And, what does work life look like now for you? And can you talk about some of the projects that you get involved in?
Yeah. So I've been really fortunate, actually. I'm actually doing more because things had stayed the same and I'd stayed the same for quite a while. In my last role, it feels like I'm doing much more. That was fantastic. It was a fantastic area of work to be in, but I feel I'm doing much more purposeful, important work for me. So I've done a little bit of international work, which is fantastic because Rob's been able to look after the girls, which I would never have contemplated. But we've got such a structure in place that I can do that, go away for a period of time and then come back. So I've been doing sort of media training for communications teams and media advice and sort of training for senior leaders. So I've been able to do that internationally, which is amazing. And I've been doing some work around reframing content to encourage local authorities to be able to bid in for government funding. So I've been doing that sort of in the UK, and I've been working with Amanda Coleman as well around crisis communications work. So that's been really, really good. So I've been doing lots of different things. So mainly media training and crisis communications advice within policing, but also within different areas. And that's been quite nice, actually, working within different sectors as well. So actually, I'm doing really purposeful, impactful work which is similar but not the same as what I was doing before. And I can still do it because I can do it in a way that it's not constant breaking news. I can do set pieces of work, and then I've got clear structured time, and I make that time work for me and for whoever I'm working with. So yeah, it's worked out really well. I feel lucky.
It sounds like you've landed that kind of sweet spot between work life and getting that balance right, but it's taken something quite fundamental for that to switch over.
Yeah, definitely. I think I still struggle. Anyone who runs their own business will tell you that. I struggle to switch off as much, but I feel much more plugged in to different areas. And to before, I was obviously within policing, but obviously now I can look across the whole news spectrum. So I feel much more plugged into different areas and, part of amazing freelance networks. And yeah, I can be there for the girls, and they understand if I have to go away, then I'm here and I'm present for a period of time with no interruption. So I feel like I have got that balance, and it's really important. It depends what people want to do, but I find it really important going away or working for me it still gives me that sense of purpose. I find that very important.
Yeah. I think you've invested so much into your career so far. You can understand how, still wanting to do something that challenges you in that way as well, I guess.
And if I can make it work, I think that's really important as well. If I can make it work, anyone can make it work, because you don't have to get up at 5 o'clock to do it. That's just me. I've always been a bit like that. But you just make it work for you. And I feel that I'm a trustee for Rett UK as well. So I sort of support them a bit from a trustee point of view, and I've worked with Together for Short Lives. I do feel quite part of what I do. I like to use my skill set. I want to support charities, that are working within all charities, but charities that are working within the supporting children and families with life limiting conditions, because I think that's a really important area that not everyone necessarily shines a light on. So I want to use my sort of skill set to be able to support charities like that, which is why I did some work around the assisted dying bill with Together for Short Lives, because I do feel if you've got a voice, it's very important, if you can use it, that you do use it.
I mean, it's interesting that the work that you do with charities that you've driven that way. I mean, I'd never heard of Rett syndrome before we spoke, and it must be difficult to kind of get the attention that something like that needs.
Yeah, and it's, they're supporting families and it's a vital thing. But for me, I feel it's very, very important that you raise awareness actually, and that if you can talk, you can, if you feel able to do it, you need to do it, because people aren't always going to know. I mean, I never, if you'd have spoken to me 8 years ago, I mean, 9 years ago, I never expected, Tilly was born completely fine. There wasn't any idea anything was wrong until she turned 1 and started losing skills. I never expected to be part of this world. And families don't. Charities do an incredible job, and they're not always going to think the way potentially a parent would think, or somebody who works in communications might think. I just think it's really important we normalize the conversation around devastating illnesses like this, because when Tilly was diagnosed, there was the former chief executive at UK. I looked to her for inspiration, and I thought, if she's doing it, her daughter's 30 now. I thought, maybe I don't have to live in fear that Tilly's going to die tomorrow. I can still live a life. And there wasn't a pathway, real pathway. And I just thought it's important, I feel, that parents see that there's a pathway for them, because other parents are doing it. Other parents have received the news you've received, but their life hasn't completely caved in terms of they can still function and they can work if they want to, and they've got a balance, whatever that looks like. But I think it's really important that we show other parents that, and I feel really strongly that I've written it, and I'm one of these days, it'll get out there. But I wrote this, I don't know if I told you this when we spoke. I wrote this book, and it's like 10 chapters and 10 lessons and things I've learned in each chapter, around receiving a diagnosis, how to advocate, and how to stay sane, that sort of stuff, because it didn't feel like there was, apart from Becky, who's amazing, Becky Jenner, who's amazing, I didn't feel there was a clear pathway. I thought, I don't know what you're supposed to do. People are like, why are you still working? It's like, that's a coping mechanism for me. It's important when you receive devastating diagnosis, because there's no way around it. I normalize it, but Rett syndrome is a very, very significant diagnosis. It's, it's Tilly could die suddenly or live until middle age. She'll always have 24-hour care needs. You'll live in a knife edge of hypervigilance and functioning, but you have to show your other child that you can function. It's very important. I feel that's very important. And you want to show other people coming through that you can live. You don't have to just exist. You can live. And I feel that's really important, because I didn't feel there was enough of that when I got that diagnosis for Tilly. And I've done a lot of work. There was a psychologist attached to Tilly's team that sort of supported me, and I don't know if that's, and Rett UK have just started a counselling service with Rare Minds for parents, because it's a very specialist thing, supporting parents whose child is critically ill. And I think there's sound like I probably am advocating, but I think, there needs to be a lot of mental health support around that once you have that diagnosis, which is probably why I can function as well as I do now. Because I took that with both hands. I'm like, yeah, give me it, give me anything. Probably the journalist in me, and maybe being exposed to people's once in a lifetime things that's happened to them. Maybe, I don't know, but give me the tools, or whatever tools are on offer, I'll take them, because I've got a responsibility to 2 little girls here, and Rett's not winning. And I do feel that. I feel, I said once, do I have to accept it? And I can't remember who I said, and they said, you don't have to accept it, you learn to live with it. So I've learned to live with it. I wouldn't say I've accepted it necessarily. And what I mean by that is, it's okay to not accept something absolutely awful, but you can live alongside it. And hopefully that's what I'm doing. And I just want to model to the girls that you can live, really. You don't have to exist. That's important.
I think for our listeners, especially those in demanding PR roles, what do you think they should take away from your story?
I think if you're working in demanding PR, huge respect. It's not an easy job, and you've got to have a certain type of personality, I think, to do it. You're already quite resilient. You're already used to compartmentalizing and intellectualizing and getting on with it. And I think all those things come to bear. I'd say look after your mental health, I think would be the first thing. Look after your mental health, because without that, you don't have anything else. And I didn't respect that enough. And I made myself quite poorly until I did respect that enough. And I wouldn't do that again. Know your window of tolerance, know what your personal tipping points are, and have the confidence to not go to them, having respect your mental health and having really clear boundaries around your energy and around what you can tolerate. Because I went too far. I was working in a very high pressure environment, and I just normalized everything coming my way until I had to stop and say, do you know what, this isn't working anymore. I think you can function, and I fortunately think I've got the balance right, but I think you have to protect your mental health, and you all know what that looks like for you. And just I don't want to sound like a self-help book. I don't want to sound like that, but I know we'd spoke before, yoga is a really big thing for me. Even if I only do 5 or 10 minutes a day, just some really simple yoga, whether that's like wrist movements or ankle movements. Just do something that's for you. Just be kind to it. It's really important, and we don't do it. And I'm as guilty as the next person. I think protect your mental health and be kind to yourself. Some days I wake up and think, oh my God, do I really need to sort that pump out again? Or do I really need to blend some food? And I'm just like, oh. And then I have a word with myself and go for a coffee or watch a film if I've got, what I mean? If I've got space, I'll use that space. You don't have to always be doing things. You can be with yourself. And I just think, I'd just say, do what you enjoy, look after your mental health and be kind to yourself. It doesn't really get much more complicated than that. And if it is more complicated than that, strip it back, because it doesn't need, I'm a walking, talking example of that. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
Dee, when you look on LinkedIn, you look at your profile and, you're doing all this amazing work and you've got this great CV and so on. People would have no idea about what's actually going on behind the closed doors, behind the surface. How have you managed to kind of like juggle those two lives?
I think I'm a very honest, open person. But I have been, so around assisted dying, I felt really strongly about that, because I just felt that the life limiting element of that for children hadn't been considered and was being pulled in, and it needed to be considered. Now that took a toll on me getting involved in that, because it was too close to home, but it still felt very important. Again, maybe the journalist in me. So I never answer it straightforward, right? So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, from that perspective, is for a long time, I felt that I had to keep them completely separate, as in Tilly and work. They were two separate things. I've come to realise, Amanda Coleman's really good on this, like sort of supporting me with this, but I've come to realise that this is part of my life, but this is also part of my life, and I've found a way to align both of them. And I think I've been able to do that because I've accepted now that I had to change my life to accommodate the challenges. I didn't do that for a long time. So now, how do I manage to do that? I do it in a way that I do the work with Rett UK. I work with Together for Short Lives. I feel passionately about giving charities a voice and supporting wherever I can, and using Tilly as a case study to raise awareness. I feel quite passionately about that. But I also know that for me, it's very important for me to retain a sense of identity as a professional person doing the crisis communications and the media relations. I think we're all a mass of contradictions, aren't we? I suppose the way I've been able to balance it is accepting all parts of me, which I didn't before. I thought I had to have one mask for this and one mask for that. Strangely enough, now I embrace all of it, which feels quite uncomfortable and quite vulnerable. But as I've learned the very, very hard way, and let it be a lesson to anyone else, you've got to accept all of you as a whole person, as a mass of contradictions, but accept all of it. So like everyone, you show a version of yourself on social media, don't you? But I'd like to think once you meet me and we chat, I'm exactly the same person, whether I'm giving professional advice that's making a politician go bright red, like I'm not listening to that. And I'm like, that's fine, but let me tell you what's going to happen. Because I think the reason I've been able to do that for so long is because my personality is vocational. So I think I've managed to just be myself and things have fallen into place. That's how I manage. I just embrace all parts of me now and don't feel I need to hide any element of it away, because you get all of me.
No, that's been absolutely brilliant. Dee Cowburn, thank you so much for sharing, and I'm sure that listeners will get a great deal out of today's podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks for listening to PR in the Real World. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the podcast and leave us a quick review. Your support really helps spread the word and reach more marketing and PR professionals just like you. And don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues or anyone who'd benefit from the insights we share. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for more tips, strategies and real world stories from the PR frontlines.